I bought the last $2 lottery ticket at a grocery store. That evening, I checked the numbers. I had won $91 million. When I called to confirm the win, the manager said 3 words. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I had been paying other people's bills for 17 years. That's what bookkeepers do, I suppose. We sit in small offices with fluorescent lights that hum just slightly too loud, and we make sure other people's numbers add up. For 17 years, I made sure Hartwell & Sons Plumbing had enough in their operating account to cover payroll, that their quarterly taxes were filed on time, that nothing fell through the cracks. In return, they paid me $52,000 a year and let me keep a small succulent on my desk named Gerald. Gerald was the most uncomplicated relationship in my life. My name is Carol Mitchell. I was 44 years old, recently divorced, and living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Dayton, Ohio, with my 17-year-old daughter Emma and a cat named Biscuit, who had strong opinions about everything. My ex-husband, Ray, had left 3 years prior for a woman he met at a work conference in Phoenix. He paid child support reliably, I'll give him that. But the marriage had been quietly dying long before he left. The way houseplants die when no one notices they've stopped watering them. My life was not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. I had Emma, who was sharp and funny and drove me half crazy in the best possible way. I had my friend Martha, who lived 2 floors down and brought wine on Friday nights and never judged me. I had Gerald the succulent and Biscuit the opinionated cat. I had a small life, and most days I was okay with it. My sister Diane was a different story. Diane was 48 and had married Gregory Holloway, Greg, when she was 26, which was considered a great match by everyone in our family. Greg sold commercial real estate and did well enough that Diane hadn't worked in over 15 years. They lived in a 4-bedroom house in Centerville, drove matching SUVs, and took 2 vacations a year. Diane had always made me feel in small and plausibly deniable ways that my life was a lesser version of what a life could be. She never said it outright. She was too smart for that. It came in the form of unsolicited advice about Emma's college prospects, comments about how cozy my apartment was, the way she'd pause just a half-second too long before answering when someone asked what I did for work. We were not close. We were family, which is a different thing entirely. The Thursday before everything changed, Diane called me at 7:14 in the evening. I remember the time because I was in the middle of paying my electric bill online, and I almost didn't answer. Carol. Her voice had that particular tone, warm on the surface with something harder underneath, like a river with a current you don't notice until you're already in it. Are you doing anything this weekend? Greg and I were thinking of driving up Saturday. We haven't seen Emma in ages. Something in my stomach tightened. Diane didn't drive 40 minutes to Dayton without a reason. She never had. We're pretty busy Saturday, I said, which was a lie but a necessary one. Oh, a pause. Well, another time then. Another pause. Hey, Mom's old jewelry, the pearl earrings. I've been thinking about those. We should sort out that stuff one of these days. There it was. A year after our mother had passed, the question of a few pieces of jewelry had never quite been settled. Not because the items were particularly valuable, but because Diane had always believed that anything of worth in the family should, by natural law, flow toward her. We can talk about it, I said. Of course, she said. Of course we can. After I hung up, I sat with the uneasy feeling for a few minutes. Then I filed it away under Diane being Diane and went back to the electric bill. The next morning, Friday, I stopped at Kroger on my way home from work. I needed milk, bread, the usual. The lottery display was right there by the checkout, and the sign said the Powerball jackpot had rolled over to $91 million. The woman in line ahead of me bought the second-to-last scratch-off ticket in the rack without even looking at it, just grabbed it and tucked it in her purse. There was one ticket left. I am not a lottery person. I'd bought maybe 3 tickets in my entire life, all of them losers. But I had $2 in my coat pocket, exact change I'd gotten back from the pharmacy, and something made me reach for it. Some small, irrational, very human impulse. I bought the last ticket. That evening, Emma was at a friend's house. I made pasta, fed Biscuit, watched half a cooking show, and then I picked up the ticket from the kitchen counter where I'd left it and pulled up the Powerball website on my phone. I checked the numbers once. Then I checked them again. Then I sat very still on my kitchen floor for approximately 4 minutes because my legs had stopped working. 5 white balls. The Powerball. Every single number. A perfect match. $91 million. I called the lottery's winner verification line. My hands were shaking so badly I misdialed twice. When someone finally picked up, a woman, efficient, clearly used to these calls. I read out the numbers on my ticket in a voice I barely recognized as mine. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the manager said 3 words. "Ticket is disputed." "Disputed," I repeated. The word didn't make sense at first. It sat in my ear like a foreign sound, like someone had spoken it in a language I almost knew. "Yes, ma'am." The woman's voice was careful, professionally neutral. "We received a call approximately 40 minutes ago from another party claiming ownership of a ticket matching those numbers. Until the matter is reviewed by our claims department, the ticket status is flagged as disputed. You'll need to bring the physical ticket to our Columbus office with valid photo ID. Don't lose it, don't damage it, and don't share the numbers with anyone else." "Who called?" I asked. "Who disputed it?" "I'm not able to share that information at this time, ma'am. Our office opens at 8:30 Monday morning." She gave me a reference number. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope, my handwriting jagged and unrecognizable. Then I sat on my kitchen floor for a very long time. Who else even knew about the ticket? I had told no one. I had bought it alone, paid with my own $2, tucked it into my coat pocket, driven home by myself. Emma wasn't there. Martha didn't know. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at work. And then, slowly, with the particular sick certainty of someone who already knows the answer, I thought about the night before. The phone call. Diane's voice. We were thinking of driving up Saturday. The 45-minute gap between when I'd left Kroger and when I'd arrived home, I'd stopped for gas. Had anyone seen me? Had the cashier mentioned it to someone? Could Diane possibly have been? No, that was paranoia. That was my brain spinning in shock. But Diane had called the evening before, unprompted for the first time in 6 weeks. And now, 40 minutes after I'd checked my winning numbers, someone had called the lottery office to dispute my ticket. I got up off the floor. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below, the familiar grid of cars under the orange glow of the streetlights, and I made myself breathe. Then I called Diane. She picked up on the second ring. In the background, I could hear the television, Greg's sports channels, always too loud. "Carol, what a surprise. Twice in 2 days." "Did you call the lottery commission tonight?" I asked. A pause. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was 2 seconds too long. "I'm sorry?" "The Ohio Lottery. Did you call their winner verification line in the last hour?" Another pause, and then Diane's voice shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, But I had known this woman my entire life, and I heard it. Something tightened behind the warmth. "Carol, why would I? What is this about? Are you okay?" "Answer the question, Diane." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "I think you're upset about something, and I'm not sure why you're calling me at 9 o'clock on a Friday night to accuse me of—" I hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand, and I thought about what I knew. I knew that I had bought that ticket alone, with my own money, at 5:47 p.m. on a Friday. I knew that I had won. I knew that someone had called to dispute my claim within 40 minutes of my checking the numbers. And I knew that my sister had called me the evening before, out of nowhere, asking to come visit, asking about things that belonged to her, about sorting out what was rightfully hers. Was I wrong? Was this a coincidence? Could there be another explanation? I went to the kitchen table and sat down. I put the ticket in front of me. That small, unremarkable piece of paper that had been sitting in my coat pocket all day. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. I looked up lottery dispute procedures in Ohio. I read about how winning ticket ownership works. Physical possession of the ticket is the primary legal factor, but disputes can be filed claiming joint purchase, theft, or gift. I read about how long disputes can take to resolve. I read about attorneys who specialize in lottery cases. I thought about $91 million. I thought about what that number meant. It meant Emma's college tuition paid in full. It meant I'd never sit under a humming fluorescent light, making sure someone else's numbers added up. It meant security, real security, the kind I hadn't felt since before Ray left, since before my mother got sick, since before a long series of years that had quietly ground me down in ways I'd tried not to examine too closely. I thought about what I stood to lose, and then I thought about Diane in her 4-bedroom house, Diane with her 2 SUVs, Diane who had never in her life gone without anything she wanted, filing a claim on money that was mine. The fear was real. I won't pretend it wasn't. My hands were still trembling slightly. My pasta had gone cold on the stove, untouched. Biscuit had come to sit beside me on the chair, which was his version of comfort, and I was grateful for it. But underneath the fear, something else was forming, something quieter and harder. I was not going to lose this. I pulled out a legal pad from the kitchen drawer, the yellow kind I used for work notes, and I started writing. Not numbers this time, names, questions, steps. The skeleton of something that wasn't yet a plan but was becoming one. First, secure the ticket. Not in my apartment. Not somewhere Diane could argue was accessible to her. I needed a safe deposit box at a bank, first thing Monday morning before I went anywhere near the lottery office. Second, do not speak to Diane again without a lawyer present. Not one more word. Third, find a lawyer, not a general practice attorney, a specialist, someone who had handled lottery disputes before, someone who understood exactly what was at stake and exactly what Diane would have to prove to make her claim stick. I wrote these 3 things down. Then I underlined them. Outside my window, Dayton was going about its Friday night as if nothing had happened. Cars moved through the intersection below. Someone was laughing in the parking lot. The world was completely indifferent to the fact that my entire life had just pivoted on a $2 scratch-off ticket. I looked at Gerald the succulent on the windowsill. We're going to be okay, I thought, but I have to be very, very careful. I didn't sleep much that weekend. Emma came home Saturday afternoon, dropped her overnight bag by the door, raided the refrigerator, and told me at length about a movie she'd seen with her friends. And I sat at the kitchen table and listened and laughed in the right places and did not say a word about the ticket. She was 17. The last thing she needed was to spend the weekend inside my anxiety. Sunday, I spent on my laptop. I searched lottery dispute attorneys in Ohio. I read reviews. I read case summaries. I found 3 firms that had handled lottery-related litigation, and I wrote down their names and numbers in order of preference. At the top of my list was a man named Patrick Reeves, a 49-year-old attorney based in Columbus who had represented a client in a 2019 Ohio lottery dispute that had made the regional news. The client had won. Monday morning, I was at the bank when it opened at 9. The branch manager, a young man named Tyler who seemed faintly alarmed by the intensity of my demeanor, helped me set up a safe deposit box. I placed the ticket inside a sealed envelope, wrote the date and my initials across the seal, put the envelope in the box, and watched Tyler lock it. I kept the key on my person. I drove directly from the bank to Patrick Reeves's office. I hadn't had an appointment, but I'd called at 8:15 and explained that I had a time-sensitive matter involving a disputed lottery claim. His assistant had fit me in at 10. Patrick Reeves was a compact, quietly attentive man who wore glasses and took notes in a small leather notebook. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he asked 3 questions. Did I have the physical ticket? Yes. Did I have any witnesses to the purchase? No, but I had paid by debit card. And did I have any record of my sister's prior calls or contacts that might establish a timeline? I thought about this. She called me Thursday evening, I said slowly, the night before I bought the ticket. Phone records, he said. We can get those. He paused. Ms. Mitchell, do you know how your sister learned you had won? This was the question that had been gnawing at me since Friday night. How had she known? I had told no one. I'd checked the numbers on my phone at home, alone, at approximately 8:50 p.m. The disputed call had come in 40 minutes later, at approximately 9:30. I had not posted anything online. I had not called anyone. And then it hit me. The cashier, I said, at Kroger. I remembered now. The woman at the checkout had noticed the lottery display, had said something cheerful about the jackpot, had made small talk while she rang me up. I had paid with my debit card. My name was on the debit card receipt. And the Kroger on Wilmington Pike where I'd bought the ticket, that was Diane's Kroger. She lived 4 miles away. She shopped there. Had she known someone at that store? Had someone seen me buy the last ticket, which would have been notable, memorable, and mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to Diane? It was thin. It was circumstantial. But the timeline was damning if you looked at it that way. Patrick agreed. We'll subpoena the store's security footage, he said. Timestamp on your purchase, footage of anyone else near that register, any subsequent interactions. We'll also pull the call records from the Lottery Commission, the exact time your sister's call came in, and we'll request the full content of her claim. She would have had to state a specific basis for disputing ownership. What kind of basis can she claim? I asked. Joint purchase is the most common. She'd have to argue she gave you money to buy the ticket on her behalf, or that you purchased it together. The burden of proof is on the disputing party. He looked at me steadily. She needs to prove she has a claim. You only need to prove she doesn't. When I left his office, I felt something I hadn't felt since Friday night. A thin thread of solid ground under my feet. 2 days later, Patrick called me. He had obtained a copy of Diane's formal dispute filing. I drove to his office and sat across from his desk and read it. Diane had stated in writing, under penalty of perjury, that she had given me $20 in cash on Thursday evening specifically to purchase lottery tickets on her behalf, and that the winning ticket had been bought with her money. I stared at the page. "She gave me no money Thursday evening," I said. "She called me on the phone. I haven't seen Diane in person in 8 weeks." "I know," Patrick said. He slid another piece of paper across the desk. "Because I already pulled your phone records for Thursday evening. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. It was entirely a phone call. There was no in-person meeting." I looked at the document in front of me. Diane's signature at the bottom of her dispute claim. Her statement that she had given me cash, in person, on Thursday. A statement that was, provably, a lie. Patrick let me sit with that for a moment. Then, "Ms. Mitchell, this is your point of no return. If we proceed, and I believe we have an extremely strong case, this becomes a legal matter. Your sister will face scrutiny. If she continues to pursue the claim knowing it's false, she is potentially committing fraud." I looked at Patrick Reeves. I looked at Diane's signature on that page. "Proceed," I said. The formal response to Diane's claim was filed on a Wednesday. By Thursday evening, my phone had received 11 missed calls, 4 from Diane, 3 from a number I didn't recognize, and 4 from Greg's cell. I hadn't answered any of them. Patrick had advised me, gently but firmly, to route all communication through his office. I was following his advice to the letter. What I had not anticipated was that they would come in person. Friday evening. Emma was at volleyball practice. I was eating a sandwich at the kitchen table when I heard the knock. Too hard, the kind of knock that is really a statement, and opened the door to find Diane and Greg standing in my hallway. Diane was wearing her camel coat and her expression of sustained patience, the one she put on when she was managing something she considered beneath her. Greg was taller than me by a foot, broad-shouldered, with the particular confidence of a man who had spent decades in rooms where he was the one with the most money. He'd always intimidated me, and he knew it. "Carol." Diane's voice was even. "We need to talk. My attorney has asked that all communication." "Carol." Greg cut across me. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "I don't think you understand what's happening here. I don't think you understand what we can do." I stepped back and let them in, because the alternative was a scene in the hallway of my apartment building, and I was done being the sister who made scenes. They sat on my couch. I sat in the armchair across from them. Neither of us offered coffee. "We're trying to handle this privately," Diane began, "because you're my sister, and I don't want this to become something ugly. But Carol..." She paused, and her voice shifted into something that was almost gentle. "You know how hard this is for us. You know what we've been going through financially." I didn't know what they'd been going through financially. Diane had never mentioned financial difficulty in her life. "Greg's been dealing with some setbacks," she continued. "Some of the commercial properties. It's been a difficult market. And when I asked you to buy those tickets for us, I genuinely thought..." "You didn't ask me to buy tickets," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of it. "We spoke on the phone for 4 minutes. You asked about Mom's jewelry. You never mentioned lottery tickets." "Carol, you signed a sworn statement claiming you gave me $20 in cash on Thursday evening," I said. "You and I were never in the same room on Thursday. I have phone records. You have no cash transaction records because there was no cash. You have no witnesses because there was no meeting." Silence. Greg leaned forward. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice had dropped, all pretense of warmth gone. "We have resources you don't have. We have contacts. If you drag this into a legal fight, it becomes public. And I promise you, Carol, the way it gets told in public is not going to be flattering to you. We can make this very difficult." "I'm already in a legal fight," I said. "You filed a dispute. I'm responding to it." "There are other ways to make things difficult," Greg said. He looked at me steadily. "Emma's father, Ray. I play golf with a man who knows Ray's current employer. College financial aid applications, things that could be looked into, questions that could be raised. I'm not threatening you, Carol. I'm telling you how the world works." The mention of Emma made something go very cold inside me, but it also did something else. It made everything clear. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not Diane genuinely believing the ticket was hers. This was a calculated attempt to take something that belonged to me, and when that failed, to use my daughter as leverage. I stood up. "Get out of my apartment," I said, quietly, completely calmly. Diane blinked. Greg stared. "Greg, if you make any contact with Ray or with Emma's school or with anyone connected to my daughter, my attorney will be adding harassment and intimidation to the existing filing. That is not a threat. It is a description of what will happen." I walked to the door and opened it. "Please leave." Another silence. Greg looked at Diane. Something passed between them. Recalculation, I realized. They hadn't expected this. They had expected me to fold, the way I'd always folded, the way small apartment bookkeepers fold when confronted by people with more money and bigger voices. "Carol," Diane started. "Goodbye, Diane." They left. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway with my back against the wall and breathed for 60 seconds. Then I called Patrick and told him everything, every word, and he took notes and said good. That weekend, I drove Emma to her grandmother's on my father's side. Ray's mother, Barbara, a warm woman in her 70s who adored Emma and had nothing to do with any of this. I told Emma I needed a few days to deal with some paperwork, which was not entirely a lie. Barbara made pot roast and let Emma binge television, and I drove back to Dayton and spent 2 days in my apartment doing almost nothing. I walked. I made tea. I sat on the floor with Biscuit and let him purr against my knee. I watered Gerald. I slept 9 hours 2 nights in a row, which I hadn't done in years. I was not hiding. I was collecting myself. There is a difference. The offer came on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after I'd filed the response. It arrived not by phone, they'd learned I wasn't answering, but in a letter, printed on cream-colored stationery with a heading that made it look almost official, as if they'd consulted their own attorney. Perhaps they had. The letter was addressed to Patrick's office and forwarded to me. The offer was for $15 million. $15 million in exchange for my withdrawing my response to the dispute and agreeing to a joint ownership settlement that would credit Diane as co-purchaser. There was a confidentiality clause. There was language about preserving family relationships. There was a paragraph that used the phrase mutually beneficial resolution 4 times. I read it sitting at Patrick's conference table. He sat across from me, watching my face. $15 million was more money than I had ever imagined having. Before last month, it would have seemed like an impossible, galaxy-brained number, the kind of money that existed in other people's stories. And part of my brain, the part that had been doing other people's accounting for 17 years, started to run the numbers automatically. Emma's education, a house, a cushion, security. But here was what the letter was actually asking me to do. It was asking me to sign my name to a lie, to agree on paper that Diane had co-purchased a ticket she had nothing to do with, to let her walk away with $76 million that wasn't hers, and to protect her from the legal consequences of the sworn false statement she had already filed, and it was asking me to be quiet about it forever. I slid the letter back across the table. "No," I said. Patrick nodded, as if he'd expected this. "I'll draft the rejection." "Make it brief," I said. She already knows why. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light and sat watching a woman push a stroller across the intersection. And I thought, was I being foolish? 15 million was real. 91 million was still disputed, still theoretical, still locked in a process that could take months. Was I turning down certainty for principle? But I kept coming back to the same thing. If I signed that paper, I would spend the rest of my life knowing that I had let someone take what was mine and then paid for the privilege of their silence. I would have money, yes, but I would also have that. I thought about my mother, who had worked as a school cafeteria aide for 22 years and never complained about it, who had given Diane the attention and Diane the praise and Diane the better bedroom, not out of malice, but because Diane had always demanded it and my mother had always given in to the path of least resistance. I thought about how I had watched that my entire childhood and told myself I would not do it. The light turned green. That evening, Martha knocked on my door at 7 with a bottle of Pinot Grigio and the expression of a woman who had been waiting patiently for permission to say something. I let her in. I told her everything. Martha was 51, a former nurse, and possessed of the particular clarity of someone who had spent years dealing with people in crisis and had long ago stopped having the time for nonsense. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, refilled her glass once, and then said, "She filed a sworn false statement." "Yes." "And offered you 15 million to pretend she didn't." "Yes." Martha looked at me. "Carol, you know what this is? This isn't a dispute about a lottery ticket. This is the same thing it's always been. It's Diane not being able to stand the idea of you having something she doesn't." I had known this somewhere, but hearing it said plainly in Martha's precise way settled something. Emma came home an hour later and found us on the couch with the wine. She read the room with the accuracy of a teenager who had grown up watching adults manage things, and she sat down on the floor and looked at me. "Mom," she said, "I'm not a little kid. Are you going to tell me what's going on?" So I told her. The simplified version, the ticket, the dispute, Aunt Diane's claim, the process we were in. I did not tell her about Greg's threat. I watched Emma's face while I spoke, the way her expression moved from surprise to confusion to something flat and clear. "She's lying," Emma said when I finished. "She's just lying." "Yes, and you're not going to let her get away with it." It wasn't a question. She was 17 and she knew me. "No," I said, "I'm not." Emma nodded. She reached over and took a piece of bread from the plate on the coffee table. "Good," she said, and that was the end of it. Later, after Martha had gone and Emma was in her room, I sat by the window with Biscuit in my lap and felt for the first time since Friday 3 weeks ago something that was close to peace, not certainty. I still didn't know how this would end, but I had Patrick, I had Martha, I had Emma, I had the phone records and the footage and a sworn statement with Diane's signature on a provable lie. I had enough. They came again on a Saturday morning, 6 days after the rejected offer. I was washing dishes when the buzzer went. I looked at the intercom screen. The small camera showed Diane, alone this time. No Greg. She was carrying what appeared to be a coffee carrier with 2 cups. She had dressed carefully, a soft gray sweater, her hair down. She looked, if you didn't know her, like someone's kind older sister coming to make amends. I almost didn't let her up, but I thought about what Patrick had said. Document everything. And I buzzed her in. She came in and set the coffees on the kitchen counter and smiled at me, and it was Diane's most effective smile, the one that said, "I know we've had our difficulties, but I'm choosing love." It had worked on me many times over the course of our lives, on our mother, on every person who had ever met Diane and concluded she was warm-hearted and I was the prickly one. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I promise. Carol, I've been losing sleep. I don't want this between us." I sat down at the kitchen table. I did not touch the coffee. "I want to understand something," Diane continued, sitting across from me. She folded her hands. "Do you understand what it's been like for Greg and me? I haven't told you. I've been too proud, I suppose. But we've had real problems. The market, some investments that didn't pan out. We have the house, but the equity. I don't want to bore you with it. But Carol, when I thought about that ticket, when I heard..." She stopped, recalibrated, looked at me with something that was a very good imitation of vulnerability. I panicked, and I made a mistake. But I thought, we've always shared things. We're sisters. Couldn't we just... "You filed a sworn statement saying you gave me cash in person on a Thursday evening," I said. "We spoke on the phone. You were never here." "I know." She didn't flinch. "I know, and I'm sorry for how I worded it. I was panicked and I was sloppy and... Look, Carol, I'm not asking you to agree that the ticket was mine. I'm asking you to think about what we're doing to this family, to think about what Mom would have said." There it was. I had been waiting for it. "Mom worked 22 years in a school cafeteria," I said. "She would have told you to be honest." Diane's expression shifted just slightly, the softness receding at the edges. "There are things," she said, "that I know about your marriage, about why Ray left, things that came out during conversations Ray and I had, things that, if they became part of a public record, a court proceeding, would be..." "Stop," I said. "I'm not threatening you. I'm being honest with you. A court case means everything becomes visible. Your divorce, your finances, the details of... Carol, I'm trying to protect you from..." "Stop," I said again. My voice was still level. "I am not sure how." Diane stopped. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. I had spent so much of my life interpreting her, making allowances for her, trying to understand the particular architecture of her selfishness, the way she always managed to make her wanting feel like you're failing. And I felt something loosen in my chest. Not anger, something quieter, something almost like grief, because I had loved her, once, in the uncomplicated way of childhood, and that person, whoever she might have been, was gone. "Diane," I said, "you filed a false sworn statement. We both know it. Your attorney knows it, and my attorney knows it. If you continue to pursue this claim, you are not just going to lose, you are going to face legal consequences for the filing itself. And I am going to let that happen, because I am done." "Carol, I'm done," I said. "I've been done with this version of us for a long time. I just didn't know it yet." Silence. Diane stood. The softness was entirely gone now. What was left was something I recognized. The tight, hard look she got when something was not going according to plan, when the world was being inconveniently resistant to her. She picked up one of the coffees. She left the other on my counter. "You're going to regret this," she said. "Maybe," I said, "but not today." She left. I locked the door. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, and yes, there was fear. Real, physical fear. The kind that makes your hands shake and your stomach clench. Greg's threat about Emma was still there. The mention of Ray and whatever Diane thought she knew was still there. The specter of a public proceeding, of things becoming visible that I'd rather keep private, all of it was real. But fear, I was learning, could work in two directions. It could paralyze you, or it could clarify you. I picked up my phone and called Patrick. The hearing was scheduled for the third Thursday of the following month at the Ohio Lottery Commission offices in Columbus. Patrick had prepared me thoroughly. We had met 5 times in the preceding weeks, going through the evidence, anticipating Diane's arguments, rehearsing how I would present myself. "You won't be on trial," he reminded me, "but conduct yourself as if every word matters." Because it does. The night before, I drove to Columbus and stayed in a hotel 3 blocks from the commission offices. Emma had offered to come. I told her to go to school. It was a Wednesday, and her AP chemistry midterm was on Friday, and the best thing she could do for both of us was to take that test. She argued briefly with the particular intensity of a teenager who knows she's right. Then she let me go. I didn't sleep well, but I had stopped expecting to. The hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined. A rectangular table, fluorescent lights not unlike the ones at Hartwell and Sons, 3 commission panel members seated at the head. Patrick sat beside me. Across the table, Diane sat with her own attorney, a silver-haired man named Warren Calder, who had the practiced stillness of someone very expensive. Greg was not present. I noted this. Patrick had noted it too. The panel chairperson, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Patricia Voss, outlined the procedure. Each party would present their position. The panel would review the evidence. Questions would be asked. There would be no interruptions. Calder went first. He presented Diane's claim with impressive smoothness. The story of a sisterly arrangement, a verbal agreement, a shared expectation. He was careful about the sworn statement. He had, I noticed, reframed it entirely. No longer a claim of a cash exchange on Thursday evening, but a good faith characterization of a long-standing pattern of ticket sharing between the sisters. Patrick made a single brief note on his legal pad. Then it was our turn. Patrick presented the phone records first. The call on Thursday evening, 4 minutes, 12 seconds, placed at 7:14 p.m. He presented the phone's GPS location data, which confirmed I was in my apartment on Wilmington Avenue. He presented Diane's location data from her own phone, which placed her 23 miles away at her home in Centerville, where she remained for the rest of the evening. No in-person meeting, no cash exchange. Provably, documentably, impossible. Then he presented the Kroger security footage. There I was at 5:47 p.m., alone, buying the last ticket in the rack, paying with my debit card. He presented the debit card statement showing the $2 transaction. He presented the timestamp on the lottery's own system, showing my ticket being registered at 5:51 p.m. And then he presented Diane's call log to the Lottery Commission, placed at 9:32 p.m. on Friday evening, 42 minutes after my verification call. Dr. Voss looked at this evidence for a long moment. Then she looked at Diane. "Miss Holloway," she said, "in your sworn filing, you stated specifically that you provided Ms. Mitchell with $20 in cash on Thursday, November 8th, in person, for the purpose of purchasing lottery tickets. Is that your testimony today?" Diane's attorney shifted. Diane glanced at him. The nature of our arrangement was, "Ms. Holloway." Dr. Voss's voice was patient and completely immovable. "Is that your testimony?" Diane looked at the phone records on the table. She looked at the GPS data. She looked at the Kroger footage on the laptop screen that Patrick had set up at our end of the table, clearly visible to the panel. I watched her. I had wondered, in the weeks leading up to this, whether I would feel satisfaction in this moment, whether I would feel vindicated or angry or relieved. What I actually felt was very calm. There may have been some. Diane stopped. Started again. Our families have always shared. Counsel, Dr. Voss said, addressing Calder directly. The panel needs a direct answer to the question of whether your client maintains her sworn statement as originally filed. Calder leaned toward Diane, and they exchanged low words for 30 seconds. The room was very quiet. Then Calder straightened. The disputing party is prepared to modify the basis of her claim, he said. We would argue instead that the sworn statement cannot be modified at this juncture, Dr. Voss said. It was filed under penalty of perjury. The panel will take a 10-minute recess. In those 10 minutes, Patrick leaned toward me and said quietly, "It's done." I looked at my hands on the table. Steady. Completely steady. When the panel reconvened, Dr. Voss did not draw it out. The evidence was clear, she said. The disputed claim lacked any evidentiary support. The phone records, GPS data, purchase documentation, and system timestamps all confirmed that the winning ticket, number JK-7742-0081, purchased November 8th at 5:47 p.m. at the Kroger on Wilmington Pike, had been purchased solely by Carol Ann Mitchell with her own funds. The dispute was dismissed in its entirety. I was the sole legal winner of $91 million. Across the table, Diane looked at the tabletop. Her attorney was already gathering papers with the brisk efficiency of a man who had other meetings to get to. I did not look at her again. Outside, in the November cold of a Columbus parking lot, Patrick shook my hand. "Congratulations, Ms. Mitchell," he said. "Now the real work begins. We need to talk about financial advisors." I stood in the cold air and breathed. Somewhere above the parking garage, a flock of birds crossed the gray sky, and I watched them go. The commission's formal written decision was issued 8 days after the hearing. It confirmed what Dr. Voss had stated at the table and went further. It flagged the matter of Diane's sworn statement for referral to the Ohio Attorney General's office for review of potential perjury charges. This had not been something I had pushed for. It arose from the Commission's own procedures. When Patrick told me, I sat with it for a moment. "Can she fight it?" I asked. "She can hire a criminal attorney," he said, "which she will need to do." The referral did not mean automatic prosecution, but it meant investigation. It meant Diane and Greg would spend the coming months under that shadow, with the associated legal costs and the very public possibility of a perjury charge. In a community like Centerville, where Greg sold commercial real estate, where reputation was currency, that shadow was its own consequence. The lottery winnings were processed over the following 6 weeks. I had chosen, on Patrick's advice, to take the lump sum rather than the annuity. The lump sum, after applicable federal and state taxes, came to approximately $54.3 million. Patrick walked me through every step. I hired a financial advisor named Sandra Okafor, whom Patrick recommended, a precise and brilliant woman who sat across from me in her Columbus office and laid out a plan for the money with the kind of calm competence I immediately trusted. Sandra's first question was practical and unexpected. "What do you want your daily life to look like in 2 years?" I thought about it. "Quiet," I said, "but not lonely." She nodded and started writing. On a Tuesday in mid-December, the funds were deposited into an account in my name. I was sitting in my kitchen when the notification came through on my phone. I looked at the number. Then I put the phone face down on the table and made myself a cup of tea and drank the whole thing before I looked again. It was still there. Emma was home from school. I called her into the kitchen and showed her the phone. She stared at it for a long time, and then she burst into tears, which made me burst into tears, and we stood in my kitchen crying and laughing simultaneously while Biscuit regarded us with deep disapproval. Greg's threats, as it turned out, had been largely hollow. Patrick had sent a carefully worded letter to Greg and his attorney outlining the potential legal exposure of his statements during their visit to my apartment, specifically the mention of interfering with Emma's financial aid applications and contacting her father's employer. The letter cited relevant Ohio statutes on intimidation and civil harassment. I never heard from Greg directly again. As for what Diane claimed to know about my marriage, whatever conversations she had imagined or invented with Ray, nothing materialized. There was no revelation. There was no public record. There was simply nothing, because there was nothing to tell. My marriage had ended because Ray had fallen for someone else. It was painful and ordinary and not a secret, and it had no power over me. I called Ray. Not to explain, I owed him no explanation. But because Emma had mentioned she'd heard about it through a mutual friend, and I wanted to hear his voice and confirm for myself that Diane's implication had been exactly what I'd suspected, a bluff built on nothing. "Yeah," Ray said when I told him what Greg had threatened. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, Carol. For whatever that's worth." "It's fine," I said. And then, somewhat to my own surprise, "It is, actually." The day I signed the final paperwork at the lottery office in Columbus, I drove home by a different route than usual. I went past the Kroger on Wilmington Pike. I parked in the lot and sat for a minute, looking at the building. The automatic doors sliding open and closed, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon commerce of the place. I thought about the woman who had bought the second-to-last scratch-off ticket without even looking at it, just grabbed it and tucked it in her purse. I hope she won something, I thought. Not 91 million, maybe, but something. I thought about the $2 in my coat pocket. I thought about Diane's voice on Thursday evening, that particular tone, warm on the surface with something harder underneath. And I thought, she called the evening before I bought the ticket. She couldn't have known. She couldn't have. Which meant this. Whatever had set Diane in motion, she'd spent 20 years watching me live a smaller life and concluded that my smallness was permanent. She could not have known about the ticket because she had called before the ticket existed. She had simply assumed, as she always had, that anything worth having would eventually find its way to her, and this time she had been wrong. I drove home. I carried my groceries upstairs, milk, bread, the usual. I unlocked my apartment door, and Biscuit appeared immediately at my feet, as if he'd been waiting, as if the fact of his dinner was the most consequential thing in the world. Maybe it was. Maybe consequential things come in all sizes. I fed the cat. I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the parking lot below, and I thought, now what? The answer, it turned out, was everything. The first thing I did with my money was nothing for exactly 30 days. Sandra's advice. "Let it settle," she said. "Don't make any large decisions for 30 days. Don't tell anyone new. Don't move. Don't quit your job yet. Just let 30 days pass and see how you feel." She was right. Those 30 days taught me more about myself than the 20 years preceding them. On day 31, I gave Hartwell & Sons 3 weeks' notice. Don shook my hand, gave me a card signed by the office staff, and said he hoped I'd recommend them if any of my new friends needed a plumber. I laughed for the first time in months. I bought a house, not a mansion, nothing unrecognizable to the woman I'd been 3 months before, but a real house with 3 bedrooms and a yard in a neighborhood I had always liked driving through. It had a porch, with good afternoon light, and I put Gerald the succulent on it immediately. Emma's college fund was established within the first month. Full tuition, room, board, a graduate degree if she wanted it, covered completely, without loans or conditions. To watch that financial calculation disappear from her eyes was the best thing I had ever seen. Martha refused any direct financial help, but accepted a gift card to her favorite bookstore and dinner once a week. This seemed to satisfy her. I started a watercolor class on Tuesday evenings, taught by a woman named Rosa, who had the patience of a saint and the vocabulary of a sailor. I was not gifted. I didn't need to be. What I had not anticipated was the quiet. I had expected a life dramatic in proportion to what had happened, but the actual texture of my days was remarkably ordinary, and that ordinariness, after everything, was the most profound luxury I had ever known. The perjury referral had been taken seriously. The investigation ran 7 months. Diane was not criminally charged. The evidence didn't meet the threshold for prosecution, but the commission's findings had made their way into the Dayton Business Journal. The phone records, the GPS data, the provably false sworn statement. In Greg's world, reputation was everything. 2 of his main clients quietly transitioned to other agencies. They sold the house in Centerville the following spring and moved to a smaller place further east. The kind of move that in their world communicated a very specific story. Diane sent me one letter about 8 months after the hearing. Short. No apology. She hoped we might find a way forward, that she would always think of me as her sister. I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer. This was not the Hollywood version of forgiveness, the tearful reunion, the lessons learned. This was real life. And in real life, some things break and do not reassemble into the same shape. But I found, to my surprise, that I was not consumed by bitterness. Most days, I simply didn't think about Diane at all. One evening in early spring, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The light was doing something golden in the yard. Biscuit was in a patch of sun at my feet. Gerald the succulent was blooming, which I hadn't known succulents did, but apparently they do under the right conditions. I thought about $2 in a coat pocket. I thought about all the small decisions that seem like nothing and quietly add up to everything. If someone had told me what was coming, I would have been terrified, but I would have made the same choices, every single one. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments, and thank you truly for listening.